The laundry that's been referred to, that's on the other side, that was the largest industrial laundry in Melbourne. And it was a real money spinner for the sisters. And there are fantastic reports of the Mother Superior being in court because all the Chinese laundry owners were really grumpy with the Good Sisters, with the Good Shepherd, because they undercut all their prices, because they didn't pay for the labour, because the girls worked in the laundries with the sisters. So as well as the laundry, what's now the Collingwood Children's Farm was their farm. So they grew all their own food, they had chickens, they had cows, the whole catastrophe, and they were constantly thinking of ways to make income. So there was a school. You'll notice on out the front there is one building that has one door into the world, and that's because that was a school for children from the hood. So they were separated from the rest of the site, but they came in, and the sisters built that when they found out that the government was going to pay institutions to educate children more money.
But what's interesting about that is that it's almost there was created a class structure, and so the day girls that would come to this place, they were completely separated from the wayward and the naughty kids. They were never allowed to see them. They weren't allowed to play with them. And when you look at the chapel, there was even a separate wing so those girls were completely separated. It's quite remarkable.
It's hierarchical.
Yeah, maybe Madonna, when I do your tours, you talk about regulation and hierarchy.
One of the things you have to remind yourself about these institutions, this one is unique because it's believed to be the last surviving relatively intact example of this sort of institution from the 19th century. The sisters that Adrienne belongs to came from the Loire Valley, from Angers, and they had a house in Dublin, a community in Dublin. So the Bishop of Melbourne, Bishop Gould, invited all sorts of organisations to come out and establish Catholic institutions after the gold rush because there was such a destitution around Victoria.
And also the men were 10 to 1 woman.
Yeah.
So they were looking for a way to get women here because families, Australia wouldn't have functioned when the women were so.
Women are engineers of domestic life and family. So they're terribly important for a civic arrangement in society. So this place was established as a true asylum. We're a bit loose with the word asylum these days, but asylum means place of refuge. So this was a refuge, and it was called a Magdalene Asylum or a Magdalene Asylum, if you use the Latin term, but after Mary Magdalene, who was forgiven by Jesus famously. And we won't go into the whole tradition of Mary Magdalene and the new approaches to that woman, but there was an idea that people who were destitute and without any form of education, some children lost parents because there was typhoid and mothers died in childbirth, all sorts of things. And the things we now take for granted with pensions and public hospitals and housing, none of that existed. There was a tent city in Collingwood, thousands of tents on the South Bank and in Collingwood. So this place was established as a refuge for women who were very vulnerable. And like any organisation, it starts out with fantastic intentions and they're small. So this group is a different sort of group because there's not 100 people in the room where we need a microphone and a different arrangement. It's the same with any sort of institution that has great intentions of ministering to the needy. And when Maggie's talking about the hierarchy, the Catholic Church is hierarchical to start with men at the top, but organisations like this have to become hierarchical so that they can run. You can't have children in different dresses because they'd all compete for clothing. You can't have them with toys because they'd want the toy that I'd want the toy that you've got and vice versa. So there's all sorts of arrangements about these places that in sociological terms you call about regulation. So just to give you an idea, you're regulated by my loud voice talking to you, and you're all self-regulating because you're listening, because you want to be here. But if Louise decides to muck up, or even if Adrienne decides to muck up, they can really upset everything. And organisations like these need lots of rules to maintain the business operations of doing laundry, of growing food, of educating children, letting them out to get jobs. So they always apply incredible sets of rules. And anyone who's been to a Catholic school or even a boarding school, we're still afflicted, or other sorts of schools, there are rules for reasons to keep order. And these places, that's what they become known for. And what gets lost, I think, particularly here, after working here as a volunteer for a long time, is the fact that this place was different from lots of others. There was really no opportunity for much abuse because you were so regulated. There was a timetable that people were subjected to, and bells governed how you did your work. Every time there was a new job to do, like if you're an 8-year-old, a bell went. You said your prayer at the end of that thing, you started a new activity like cleaning or learning or sweeping or religious lectures. There's a timetable in the 1880s that explains what 9-year-olds did at this place. And you are so busy from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night when you retire to bed in silence. That's what the instruction is. You're too tired to do anything, let alone sleep and get up the next day. And they only had one day off. And the children cleaned the convent. People who were here for a custodial sentence did the laundry. But the women who ran it and made it operational, who actually had the best intention of educating people and providing them with a nurturing environment and a roof over their heads. People like someone with polio or asthma. You know, you couldn't get a job if you didn't have an education, you couldn't breathe. Great place to live for asthmatics is a convent because it's so clean, because it gets clean to within an inch of its life. So there were quite a few people who lived here for the long term who were either physically vulnerable or intellectually vulnerable. And they weren't part of the mentally disturbed brigade who were housed at the Kew Asylum up the road, or Yarra Bend and then the Kew Asylum. Yeah, so regulation is important in any institution. It's knowing when to cough and when not to cough, when to laugh. And so this is no different. It's just that we see it as sort of punishing, and it is, because anyone who's experienced it in a place like this, you lose your autonomy. You wear the same frock as everybody else. You don't have a lock, you don't have your own clothes, you don't have a locker to put your clothes in, they're distributed. So there's sort of no competition with the uniformity that applies here. Mm-hmm. But what Louise was talking about was how the prevailing thought about how to make civic society, and it wasn't just the convent, it wasn't the sisters, you separate people who are bad from the people who are good. We do it now in prisons, no different. And here you'll find the children's orphanage, which is now what is occupied by the nursing home on the corner. That was the younger children's orphanage. And when Adrienne said, oh yes, we let the children out to play, they were let out to play within that space. They were bounded by walls. They didn't come out over here. They were kept there to protect them from the people who might be a bad influence, who were over this side and working in the industrial laundry, often under a custodial sentence. So there's different groups within this convent. We talk about that on a tour. So there's actually 5 communities within the convent: sisters, young orphans, older orphans, a group of boarders, and then women who are sent by the courts.